All right, today we're stepping into what you might call Frantz Fanon's pharmacy. Now, you won't find easy remedies on these shelves. Instead, what we're going to find is a blistering diagnosis of our modern world and a really controversial prescription for its sicknesses. We'll be using the work of scholar Akilman Bembe as our guide to explore Fanon's tough ideas on democracy, violence, and racism. So let's dive in. So right off the bat, this quote from Mbembe is a jolt to the system. It forces us to question the very foundation of the societies we live in. The idea that enmity, active hostility, isn't just a bug in the system, but an actual feature of liberal democracy. Well, that really sets the stage for a radical new way of looking at our political life. Okay, part one, democracy's dark side. The core argument we're digging into here is that Western democracies have always had this phosphorescent matter, as Mbembe calls it. Think of it like a toxic internal glow that lights up democracy's own dark side. And this isn't some threat from the outside. It's born from within, from the long history of colonialism and race that democracy has in many ways turned against itself.
And to understand this sickness, we have to turn to our physician, Frantz Fanon. You see, Fanon wasn't just a philosopher writing from an armchair. He was a psychiatrist, a clinician, who was diagnosing the deep psychological wounds that colonialism inflicted, not just on the colonized, but on the colonizer too. He looked at the world and saw a profound social neurosis.
Now in part two, we'll see how Fanon built this diagnosis by looking at the world that shaped him. I mean, his thinking was a direct reaction to the absolute carnage of the 20th century, an era that completely redefined our capacity for self-destruction. The First World War? That was the moment the mask just completely fell off. The industrial-scale slaughter in the trenches, the poison gas, the sheer numbers, it just shattered Europe's image of itself as this enlightened, superior civilization. It revealed what Freud would call a primitive psyche, a deep, indestructible drive for destruction that was always just lurking right beneath the surface. And check this out, because this timeline kind of rewrites the story many of us learn. The concentration camp, the ultimate symbol of 20th century horror, it wasn't invented in Nazi Germany. It was a tool that was developed and perfected out in the colonies by the Spanish in Cuba, the US in the Philippines, the British in South Africa, the Germans in Southwest Africa, all before it was brought back home to Europe. It was an instrument of colonial warfare first. So what's the psychological engine driving all this destruction? Well, Freud had a name for it, the death drive. It's this basic impulse toward destruction. And when a society turns that drive outward, you get things like colonialism and fascism, the total subjugation of other people. But as Fanon saw, that very same drive can also be turned inward, leading a society to literally tear itself apart from the inside. And this brings us right to part three, the sickness of racism. See, for Fanon, racism wasn't just about prejudice or ignorance. No, it was the primary symptom of this deep-seated social sickness, a neurosis that had infected every single part of the colonial world. And what's so brilliant about Fanon's diagnosis is how he saw this sickness adapting. He identified two forms. First, there's vulgar racism. The crude, biological kind, obsessed with measuring skulls and talking about genes. But then he saw a more evolved, more insidious form, cultural racism. This type doesn't attack your rheology. It attacks your way of life, your language, your customs, your beliefs. It devalues them or just turns them into exotic objects. It's a racism that constantly changes its shape, which makes it so incredibly hard to fight, even today. And this quote, wow, it just hits you with the devastating personal cost of all this. In his own words, Fanon is describing what it feels like to be seen through the racist gaze. It's not just an insult, it's a violent act. It's a psychological dismemberment. Your very body, your identity is snatched from you, broken into pieces, and then put back together as an object of disgust. So how does this whole projection thing actually work? Well, Fanon identified a process he called transitivism. It's basically a massive act of psychological dumping. A society takes all its own shame, its own repressed violence, its ugliest parts, and it projects them onto a scapegoat. That scapegoat, the Negro, the Jew, the Arab, is then forced to carry the heavy burden of the dominant culture's own disavowed evil. But Fanon didn't stop there. He went even deeper, right into the psychosexual roots of this fear. He argued that the racist phobia of the black man isn't just about difference. It's deeply tied to these infantile anxieties about sexuality. The black man is turned into what he called a phobogenic object, a thing designed to create fear, and is imagined to have this monstrous, threatening sexual power,
which is seen as a direct threat to the colonizer's own fragile sense of self. So, if that's the diagnosis, what's the cure? This brings us to part 4, and to Fanon's most famous, and most misunderstood concept. He prescribed violence. Not as a goal in itself, but as a necessary cleansing medicine for a society that was riddled with the cancer of colonialism. For Fanon, this regenerative violence wasn't just chaos. It was a clear 3-step process. Step 1, you have to violently demolish the colonial system, a total clean slate. Step 2, and this is so important, is an internal act. The violence shatters the psychological chains of fear and inferiority that the colonized person has been forced to carry. And only then can step 3 happen, the creation of a new humanity, a real resurrection.
So, and this is the crucial point, right? This was never about just swapping out who was in charge. Fanon's vision was way more radical than that. The goal wasn't just to take over the old, broken state. The goal was to use the force of decolonization to create a completely new kind of society, a new way of being human together. But here's the thing, and this is the part of Fanon that is so often ignored. Destruction was only half of the prescription. The ultimate goal of this violent struggle, the other half of what's in this pharmacy, was care. It was all about healing, restoration, and creating a new, more expansive humanism.
And you can really hear the clinician in him in this quote. A patient is someone who suffers. This is the heart of Fanon's entire project. The violence was like a terrible necessary surgery to remove a sickness. But the end goal? It was always compassion, tenderness, and finding relief from suffering.
And that cure could never be an individual thing. For Fanon, healing is a social act. It's about breaking the terrible isolation that racism and colonialism create. It's about rebuilding the common, that link between people, through communication, recognition, and literally re-entering a world you'd been thrown out of. It's such a powerful idea for any society that's struggling with division. So what does that recognition actually look like in practice? Fanon gives us 3 really concrete foundations. A real name, not some generic dismissive label. A face that is truly seen and recognized as human, not just a profile to be categorized. And finally, a place, a real space in the world, a home on an earth that belongs to every single one of us.
Which leaves us with this one final, really urgent question. Fanon's pharmacy, it offers a bitter medicine. His diagnosis shows us the deep sickness of racism and colonial violence that's still with us. His prescription is frankly terrifying, but his ultimate goal was a healed world. So the question he leaves for all of us is this: what does it actually mean to build a truly common world for everyone out of the violent wreckage of our shared history?